Question to Sharma. Dave, you have been to Gaza before. You know everyone there is not Hamas. You have met them. You have seen them in your own eyes. You know my dead sister is not Hamas. That my other sister is still trapped in Gaza is not Hamas. And you are a father too. You have children. How many more dead Gaza kids is okay? How can you sleep at night continuing to support this disproportionate attack that is literally killing thousands of innocent children like my nieces and nephew?
Dave, the question is essentially, is the attack disproportionate? There are so many children dying. Is it disproportionate?
Well, firstly, I'd say it's been terrible to see the loss of life. I have been to Gaza many times. I've, had lunches in families' homes there. I know some Gazan Palestinians personally, and I mourn for their losses. It's been a terrible tragedy to see. I think it's every loss of innocent life on either side of this conflict is awful. I'm not here as a spokesperson for the Israeli government, and nor am I here as a spokesperson. I'm not a Jewish Australian. I'm here as someone who's served in the region and knows both sides of this conflict. And war is a terrible thing, but we have to remember how this began, which was the October 7th terrorist attacks. I mean, people call for a ceasefire. As Hillary Clinton pointed out last week, there was a ceasefire before the 7th of October until Hamas breached it. Hamas came in through the fence, it slaughtered children in their homes, it killed parents in front of their children, it raped, abducted, murdered, defiled any number of people. This is how this conflict started. And of course, what's unfolding is a tragedy now. But until Hamas is ousted from political power, I don't see a way to resolve this absent. You leave them there, there will be further bloodshed, further loss of life and further conflict.
Patricia, can I address a little bit of that issue?
I prefer to just ask Tim a question because I just want to get the government's position on this. Penny Wong, our foreign minister, her assistant minister, said don't bomb hospitals and basically said it wasn't acceptable. Do you believe what's going on is a war crime?
Well, let me just begin by saying, PK, that we've seen a harrowing loss of life in Gaza, including far too many children. And this needs to stop. The Australian government has supported Israel's right to self-defence. We've also made it very clear that the way it exercises that right matters, and particularly it matters that Israel complies with international humanitarian law. So we call on Israel to honour its commitment to uphold international humanitarian law.
So you don't think it's honouring international humanitarian law?
Well, hospitals are protected under international humanitarian law.
So is that a war crime in your view?
Medical doctors are protected, patients are protected. There are a number of principles of international humanitarian law.
And have they been breached? Because you're not really answering it. Well, have they been breached?
PK, what I'm articulating are the principles here. So other principles of international humanitarian law are proportionality, distinction, precaution. It's obligated on Israel to take all feasible measures to distinguish between civilians and military targets, and to take steps to protect civilian life and civilian infrastructure. We have been very clear in setting those standards, setting those principles, and communicating them to Israel. They're in no doubt about our position and the position of the international community on this. Yeah,
Mark, obviously there are concerns. You saw huge rallies on the weekends. People are concerned that it is disproportionate. Can you understand the community concerns around this?
Of course I can understand the community concerns not because it's disproportionate, but, every life is sacrosanct. And it doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 10,000. It's absolutely shocking to see these deaths. It's absolutely shocking. And there are war crimes being committed that are leading to these deaths. War crimes clearly committed by Hamas. I mean, they're the ones who are... when you look at this picture, what you see is that Hamas is actually more important to kill Palestinians than it is to kill Israelis. That's something you've got to bear in mind, because every Palestinian that dies gives them the opportunity to blame Israel. Look, for example, Israel has told the Palestinians, given them the opportunity to get out of harm's way. It's given them warnings. It's sent leaflets around the place.
It is hard to get out though, Mark.
It is definitely hard.
Most people say there's no safe place.
There's safer places and less safe places. I think that's fair comment. But the bottom line is that they're stopping them from getting out. They're putting up blockades to stop them from going. Now, for the first time, they've been able in Shifa Hospital to facilitate the removal of patients there with the cooperation of the hospital only because Hamas, has been removed from the scene. This is the huge tragedy. It's a shocking tragedy. Every life is important. And my view is that the only way this is going to stop is through the removal of Hamas, because otherwise you're going to have this loss of life again and again and again.
Now, so that is the main argument that's being put, that
before
Hamas
we get anywhere near
keep...
that argument, I mean...
Well, do you agree, though, that Hamas will do this again?
Palestinians are killed. We're then blamed for our death, and then in our death we're smeared. There's no sanctity to a Palestinian life when an Israeli advocate speaks on a Palestinian death. It's outrageous that 5,000 Palestinians have died, and we're still talking about whether or not we should stop the blood. Should the hostages be released? I've already spoken about that. But the thing we are not talking about is the context, Patricia. For 17 years before October 7, the daily calorific intake of the amount of food that's required in there was calculated by Israel, and only that much food goes in. It's a medieval siege, 500 trucks a day. In the 35 days since, less than 500 trucks have been in. We should have had 17,000 trucks if things were normal. Now ask yourself, why is trucks of food being delivered to a captive civilian population? As David Cameron described it when he was Prime Minister, an open-air prison. The reality is that whilst Israel denies Palestinians hope, we've got to work towards a better tomorrow. This land is Abraham's land. I'm half Muslim and half Christian. Mark is Jewish. That dirt calls for all of us.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because earlier, I've got to say, you said that we're Palestinians are indigenous to the land.
Of course.
Absolutely. Some Palestinians are absolutely indigenous to the land, but there are Israelis and Jewish people who are also indigenous to the land.
Palestinians don't deny Jewish indigeneity.
Actually,
we just don't think it's superior.
Some of the movement at the moment that we're seeing does actually suggest that they're a settler colony which is at odds with being indigenous, isn't it?
So Jewish connection and the Zionist enterprise of the State of Israel today are two separate connections. The desire for a Jewish homeland, I get it. I've got 100 years of
So you support a Jewish state?
I support a Jewish homeland. The anti-Semitism that drove the need for a Jewish homeland is a Western construct.
But not a state.
Mark, I didn't interrupt you once. The Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust, the pogroms, all that was all Western Europe. A Jewish homeland, absolutely. As a Palestinian, I want a Palestinian homeland. But a Jewish homeland that says all Palestinians it has to be at the expense of all Palestinians. And when I say all Palestinians, my grandchildren when they come along, etc. Not only does it have to be a Jewish homeland at the expense of all Palestinians, but at the continued oppression of every Palestinian.
So you're opposed to a majority Jewish state?
I'm opposed to inequality. Today we have an apartheid state between the river and the sea. Half the population is free and half isn't. We need to move to a situation. In South Africa, we never contemplated two states, a black state and a white state.
Arab Israelis do vote. They get elected to the Knesset. There is actually
70 rules, 70 laws that say they are second-class citizens. The number one rule is the 2018 nation-state law that says self-determination is available for the Jewish people and the Jewish people alone. That precludes the Druze, the Samaritans, the Muslims, the Christians. The Jewish people alone, there's inequality. We got rid of apartheid South Africa. We didn't get rid of South Africa. We need to get rid of apartheid in Palestine, Israel. Okay. Everybody should be free from the river to the sea.
Now, if this discussion is raising any difficulties for you or anyone you know, the number for Lifeline is 13 11 14 and Kids Helpline is 1800 55 1800. Both those are on the screen.